Chrono Knight back here with another Chaos Galaxy video. And today we're going to be talking about staples and tech cards, which I thought would be a very interesting video going into the next format. As me and some other players have been trying to figure out what this new format is going to shape out into. Um, no pun intended, based on the Shape Knights and the Blue Flame creatures being added into the format. Just trying to figure out what the next format is going to look like, especially with a tournament upcoming. And so I figured a good video for you guys would be to talk about cards that I think are good staples or good tech cards to add into your deck, depending on what type of strategy that you want to go for, right? So let me break down the tiers, just like in my last video. And if you haven't checked out my last video on the deck tier list, please go check that out. I think that adds a lot of context to what I'll say in this video. And if you are interested in playing, some more of the competitive type of decks, I think you would really enjoy that video. So yeah, let's hop right in. So the first tier is main deck worthy. I think almost regardless of whatever planet or strategy you're playing, the particular cards that are going to go on this list are main deck worthy. What I'll try to do as I go through the video and also like towards the end is try to organize them in a fashion where the cards closest to the top are like, you should play this as much as you can, versus things that are main deck worthy, but if you swap it out for a different tech card, it's not the end of the world. So it's a little bit of a different type of approach to this tier list. And let me know how you guys feel about that in the comments below. But like I said, I'll try to organize it in a fashion where it makes the most sense, right? Because every deck, doesn't use the same planet and could be a little bit niche in that particular way. But yeah, next is side deck worthy. I think it's good to have this in a side deck to prepare for certain matchups based on the matchups that I think would be pretty popular or things that I think you should respect going into a tournament. Once again, this is thinking about a tournament setting. Spicy Tech. These are cards that I think are a little bit under the radar, but I think they have a lot of utility and could very well be placed into the main deck, right? Or even a side deck. So I think they're worth considering, and I think they're good discussion starters as far as the Spicy Tech category. And I think that's going to be really good to think about moving forward. Next is niche or situational. This means that the card, yes, it has some utility, but maybe it's only in a very particular situation, or it might help this one planet with this one thing. And so I'll also try to organize these in order as much as I can. But basically that's what this category is dedicated to. And then last but not least is cut it out. Like just cut the card. Like um, it might have some utility, but it's probably so situational that you're probably hurting your deck consistency just putting it in or making your strategy worse than what it would be if you just didn't have it in the first place. So yeah, all right, without further ado, we have a lot of cards to get through, so let's jump right in. First thing is AAA. Without a doubt, you should be playing this card. I've heard some discussions about cutting it to one, depending on what type of strategy you're going for. So usually this is dedicated for either point turret or Beast of the Black Hole. And some strategies might not care about one or the other. And so maybe cutting it to one is a discussion. But for the most part, like everybody should have this in their deck. And I can almost guarantee everyone will have at least one copy going into the tournament. So main deck worthy for sure. Next up is Abandonment. Kill all zone creatures that are not from their original planet. My take on the format is that there would be a lot of mono planet strategies, which basically means that if you play a planet, the majority of your creatures are going to come from that planet. And so Abandonment is still a weird card, I think, with social strategies falling out of popularity. And I could be wrong. And I would love to, hear a discussion on that. But I'll put it in side deck worthy. It might help you with a particular um, against a certain type of card or strategy that you think is like gonna hurt you. For example, like APC runs a lot of creatures from different planets, right? And so if you're really concerned about that matchup, you can definitely throw Abandonment in as a side deck option. Okay. Next up is Black Hole Blocker. This is an interesting one. I think with the popularity of cards, I'm sorry, the popularity of decks being able to put up two creature boards, I think Black Hole Blocker is actually main deck worthy. This could be a hot take, but my thought process is that it gives you a lot of flexibility. Um, I look at it as almost like a third AAA. Because if you're thinking about you're dedicating a AAA to Pointer and to Beast of the Black Hole, it's a third counter to Beast of the Black Hole, but also gives you a flex spot against things like Galaxy Crash and Divine Doom, which may be popular going into the tournament. And so I think it's not a bad card to have. And even if it gets hit by Mole, I mean, it's not the end of the world, but it really gives you a lot of flexibility to keep your board sticky. Um, where, like I said, the top decks right now are cranking out two creature boards and putting a lot of pressure on you. And so, as much as you can, keeping your creatures on board is going to be beneficial. All right. Next up, card consuming Cosmic Creator. Um, you get rid of one card in your hand to gain 6 stars. Um, at first, I was gonna put this as like niche or situational. Um, but in a lot of situations, especially with the top decks, sometimes you actually do want to get a card into the graveyard to kind of accelerate your strategy. So for right now, I'm actually gonna put it in the bottom of main deck worthy. Um, keeping up economically and also getting your combo started is very underrated, but very useful. And so this card could definitely see some utility. I've already seen it splash into Shias Blue Flame decks, where you're pitching a Shias creature, hopefully one of the Blue Flames that can come back with your permanent resource, but you're gaining 6 stars, right? So you're kind of fixing the Shias economy, problem, and also getting the Blue Flame combo set up very quickly. So I think it's worth having in the main deck. And even if you're not running Shias, any deck that benefits from the graveyard could definitely see some utility with this. Could be a hot take, but let me know. Next up is Pelfam. Now, I have an interesting thought on Pelfam. I think Pelfam is um, obviously very useful and has been a staple for a very long time, and has even been limited on the ban list to one copy because of how useful it is. And so I definitely think it's main deck worthy, but I'm going to keep it towards the bottom of main deck worthy. Basically, meaning, like I said before, if you take Pelfam out and substitute it for something else, I think it's totally fine. Yes, it's a good staple, but if your deck doesn't have it, I don't think you just like auto lose or something like that. Whereas I think if you're not running any AAAs, you're just making yourself very, very, very vulnerable. Um, unless you're kind of running the Crozon strategy, but even then, um, you really got to know what you're doing. Okay. Next up is Bub World. Oh my goodness. Someone submitted this, or I heard someone discussing this as a counter to Shape Knights. So it says all zone creatures lose 2 stars, which is going to obviously hurt the Shape Knight strategy, right? Because their power is dependent on the number of stars that they have. And so I still think it's just very situational. I almost want to put it and cut it out. But if your deck is just like really, really hurting against Shape Knights and like you're really scared of that matchup, then I kind of can see the utility. But I wouldn't say it's like side deck worthy for every other matchup. It's just very niche. So yeah, I'll just throw it there. Next up is Cosmic Conjurer, which I think is pretty interesting. This card came up in discussion because a lot of people were concerned about their permanent resources getting destroyed by some of the other cards that I'll show in the list. And basically, see if I zoom out here, if that makes it easier to see. Yeah, that's a little bit better. Yeah, that's better. They were concerned about one more time. Yeah. If the perm resources are destroyed, if you buy a resource and get it back, I don't know. I think the strategies that are running the permanent resources right now, Blue Flames and Shape Knights, if you're a good player, you're keeping them in rotation, or you're using them at the right time to get an advantage. And so you're not really that afraid of them getting destroyed because you're playing around things like that. So um, I'll actually put it and cut it out. Like you probably would just waste your time running that card and it'll be a brick. And it also requires you spending stars or some effect to get another resource card before you can even, I mean, resource zone before you can even activate the card. So I'm gonna say no for that. Next is Beast of the Black Hole. I think this card is definitely main deck worthy. Um, I'll put it right below AAA. It's not necessarily too much of an order, but yeah, Beast of the Black Hole is just really good. I think you punish a lot of aggro strategies, or it's just a good way to defend your planet and clear the board. And then if you have good follow up, you can punish your opponent for overextending. So not too much to say about that. Next up is Charge Blaster. Charge Blaster, you pay stars to destroy a creature. Now, in previous formats, I think this was a really good card to have, either in the main deck or the side deck. But the current format, the decks that I believe are strong right now, and even some tier two decks, are really good at bringing their creatures back even after they're killed. And you're not so concerned about the ability of when the card is killed. You're more so concerned about how your opponent is bringing it back and when they're bringing it back. So spending stars to just like kill one creature is not as strong in this current format. So I would say cut it out. Next, spoons. Okay, so spoon says top three cards of your deck. You add one to your hand, you kill one, and you put the other one on the bottom of your deck. I think this is main deck worthy. I'll put it towards the bottom though, similar to Pelfam, where if you don't run spoons, not the end of the world. Because there's a weird interaction with spoons and the shape knights, for example. If you free play Lionel at the beginning of your turn, and then try to use spoons, you can't play any other creatures for the rest of your turn because Lionel counts as your one creature play for that turn. Um, and so, like, there's like a little bit of like spoons not really working so well with the shape knights in that regard. Um, so yeah, like if you're not running it, you're not just gonna auto lose or anything, but it's still main deck worthy because it's a very powerful card. Next up is Blaze Elixir. I'm gonna put Blaze Elixir in niche or situational. I think it depends on the deck, and similar to my thought process for putting cards in my deck in general, you want to have at least 4 to 6 good targets. And so you really got to look at your deck and see like, does it really make sense for me to run Blaze Elixir, or is there a better card that would give me more utility? Because you're waiting to draw it, or you might use Helpo Belt, but you got to really look at your deck and understand like, do I really need Blaze Elixir? Yes or no? All right, next up, kind of a funny one too. Double-sided spear. It basically says you attach this to your creature, and then when you battle another creature, even if you would die from that battle, you kill your opponent's creature. Um, Kind of a cool interaction, but similar to my explanations related to Charge Blaster. A lot of decks don't necessarily care about their creatures getting put in the grave, especially if they have a way to bring them back. And then that's still a one. Let's see, that's you're investing 2 cards to kill 1 card, so you're kind of going negative, and it's a little bit unnecessary. Um, and I think the health on a lot of creatures isn't that out of control outside of like Arctorius, but there's still outs to him as well. So I would just say cut this out. All right, next up is Time Flash Portal. Now, for me, spot removal, like removing a key creature and canceling its ability, is really, really powerful to me in this particular format because that whole negating the ability and putting it out of play for a couple of turns can really swing things into your favor. Um, I would put it like towards the top of main deck worthy, actually. If your deck if it makes sense for you to run this and you got spots, I think you'll definitely find utility. And every time you draw it, I think you'll be pretty happy, right? Because you'll have an opportunity to either swing for face or remove a very annoying creature from the board. All right, next up is Abomination Tomb. Abomination Tomb. Um, like I said, the current format is really into bringing things back from the grave, and so having it, hmm, it's definitely main deck worthy. Um, hmm, I'm thinking it's going to be towards the middle slash end. Um, I'll put it somewhere between these two. I mean, for right now, I mean, it's just a really good card. I'll put it in front of Black Hole Blocker. But the thing with Abomination Tomb is that some strategies only run one Abomination Tomb because of space, or their deck is already kind of lined up where it's not so reliant on you using this one card to bring your stuff back. Um, so yeah, I mean, if you don't need to run it, cool. But if you have the space, you probably should run it. All right. Next up is Cloud Cells. I'm gonna put Cloud Cells as our first spicy tech card. It's really good in the Shape Knight strategy, um, where you can control the number of stars for your Shape Knights, and more stars equals more power, right? Um, I haven't really explored it as a counter. I never really thought about it like that. Like for example, if my opponent plays Arctorius with 10 stars, using their cloud cells, and then or if they just play with 8 stars, and then I put my cloud cells on it to reduce it down to one. I guess that could be a thing. Um, but the spicy tech choice is really more so from the offensive side of using it. And I think there's more to be explored with this card. All right, next up is Crash Landing. Crash Landing says when your creature is played, when your opponent's creature is played, half its power. A lot of stuff right now, like I said, the health isn't too out of control. So, I mean, you're spending a card to cut a card in half that you probably could kill anyway. And there's other unique forms of removal, so just cut it out. No need to get too fancy. Like Crash Landing, I don't think is a good choice. Erratic Void. A while back, I don't know if you guys remember from a previous video, in a previous format, I felt like Erratic Void was definitely main deck worthy. A lot of decks were reliant on like things like Soul Shroom and Bone Ladder. Um, but with me somewhat predicting them going out of popularity, and because EV is only going to stop like one key interaction, but if the decks are good at looping things over and over, you're only going to stop one out of maybe 3 or 4 opportunities for your opponent to bring something back. And so, with that being said, I'll put it at. Hmm, I'll put it in niche or situational. I still love the card and I still love what it does, but the way I kind of see the format going, I think there are going to be better options. Okay, next is Crimson Screech. You stop your opponent from attaching something to their own creature. I don't necessarily see this happening too much. Even if I did, it would be like so situational that it's like you're better off just not running it. So I'll put it and cut it out. Next is Bull Water. Similar kind of thing. Uh, I'm cut it out. It says when one of your creatures would die in that turn, it doesn't die. You kill this instead. I mean, you're taking up a zone to stop one interaction, um, and I just don't see enough value in that. All right, next up is Planetary Field. Planetary Field is interesting to me because it's one of those staples where it's like, yes, it's so good, but I've also played decks with outfield and have been just fine as well. Um, and it kind of depends because I think field kind of pairs well with some of the other things like firewall, for example. Like if you're running double firewall, maybe you don't need field, or if you're running one firewall and one field, that's actually really good. Um, But I've always been a believer of like challenging the staples and seeing if they're actually necessary or if there's ways that you could play around it by just making better in-game decisions. And so, yes, main deck worthy, but I'll keep it towards the bottom. Whereas if you take it out, not the end of the world. Okay, next up is for sale sign. For sale sign, I'm actually gonna put hot take, put that in niche or situational. Um, the reason being is that some decks do not handle star economy really well. And so if you're already in a matchup where you're kind of struggling for stars, or you want to really be careful about how you're spending your money, your stars, then for sell sign puts you in an awkward position, because yes, you might want to remove a card, but you might not be in a position to trade back and forth with your opponent, right? And so you're like, okay, I'll take your card, and then they take it back, but you're not able to keep going back and forth without burning through your resources. Next is Krorak Comet. This used to be a really strong side deck card, really one of the main side deck cards in my opinion, just to protect you against like weird gimmicky strategies that use the permanent resources. And with the popularity of permanent resources, um, and because it also has some utility against things like Abomination Tomb and Phantom Matter, I'm actually gonna say that Karar Comet is main deck worthy. Could be a spicy tech, but I think if your deck has enough space to run at least one copy, I think you'll be happy with having it. Because if you ever catch your opponent in a position, let's say you're going against the Blue Flames, right? If you ever catch them in a position where they're not able to shuffle the permanent resource and you kill it, um, that could be really, really huge. Because the Shia strategy is very dependent on the Blue Flame combo right now. And so sniping a permanent resource if they ever misplay, or even sniping a Phantom Matter, I think there's enough utility to hold on to one copy at least. All right, next is Eternity Amulet. Eternity Amulet is some spicy tech. I think it's really good for the Shape Knight strategy, especially combating some of the other matchups, because you want to emphasize the utility of the planet card, right? So Sendian says if you have two creatures, your opponent can only attack the one with the highest health. And so Amulet turns some of your somewhat mid creatures, right, that might have solid stats and can really buffer them to really high stats and make your board even more sticky. And like I mentioned before, I think that's going to be very useful in the current format. Next up is Galaxy Crash. Um, hmm. Hmm. Galaxy Crash. Galaxy Crash. I'll put it the mid to bottom. Um, like I'll put it behind Pelfam, but above Spoons. Um, Sometimes it has an awkward interaction, like I said, with the Shape Knights. You bring back Lionel on the beginning of your turn, and then if you draw Galaxy Crash, it's like now your Lionel is not really useful because you don't want to use a free play and then play Galaxy Crash. So you would have to kill it first with Galaxy Crash, and it's like that's just kind of awkward. Um, in pretty much every other deck, though, I think it is a good choice. Um, but once again, similar to Field, I'm just kind of challenging whether or not you need to run certain cards, or if you can find something that's a little bit more custom to your deck. All right, so let's keep going. Bar of Misfortune. Um, Cut it out, just please. Someone submitted this and wanted my take on it. I think you do not want to run this card. It says you bring back a killed creature with 4 stars or less, I believe. You attach it to this card, and then at some point throughout the turn, whether the beginning or the end, you add that card to your hand, and then you can do this once per turn. So you're supposed to be able to like recycle killed stuff. The problem is that you can only do it once per copy or once per type of card. And that's just too niche or too situational to even be useful. And a lot of the targets that you would even consider doing that with, I mean, you probably only going to use it once or twice in a game, and you probably would just run Abomination Tomb instead, right? Um, at first, I thought there might be some utility with things like Sindel for like scale gas, but you only bring in back scale gas one time, and it's already limited to one. So you're not getting enough utility out the card to do anything with it. Next up is Crimson Grenade. Crimson Grenade has been talked about in pairing with the Shape Knights as a way to kind of keep them on the field because they only have 10 health, but they have decent power. And so if you can never catch your opponent swinging into one and then you counter it, um, that could be a good way to punish. I'm still going to just put it in niche or situational. And even so, towards the bottom, because I think the deck does fine without this type of card. Um, and the meta is going to shift towards bouncing things as opposed to like attacking and killing it. So there's chances that this could be a brick, and you might want to run something different as opposed to this card. Next up is Ice Elixir. Ice Elixir. Where do I put Ice Elixir? It's somewhere between niche and cut it out. I get the idea, right? You might want to stop your opponent from, attacking with a certain card that gets a benefit. Like if he frees Laji, he doesn't get the search. But I think decks are gonna run ways to get rid of attachments. And then even so, you would have to have a stall strategy that makes sense to keep an opponent's creature on the field, like maybe a Bogonk. And I hope I'm not giving them too much too much sauce with this card. But yeah, I'm gonna just put it and cut it out. Okay, next up, Super Bouncy Trampoline. Hot take. I think Super Bouncy Trampoline is main deck worthy. I'm actually gonna put it a little bit above Black Hole Blocker and Abomination Tomb. A lot of the interactions right now are based around creature abilities, whether that's Chakra of the Blue Flames, Scorn from the Shape Knights, Glove from Gaios, Pelfam, which is a staple. Um, or any other card that like directly affects one of your cards, being able to counter and bounce that back can really punish your opponent. Um, Biggest interaction is like if Chakra tries to shuffle your card and you shuffle it back, you make it significantly harder for your opponent to get the combo going without having to get Laji, to get the perm, to get Chakra, and that could really be vital time to get you back going. All right, next up is Firewall. Firewall, I'll put in for anyone playing Shias. I'll actually put it in main deck worthy. But towards the bottom, like if you're not running it, it's okay. But if you have a Shias deck, making your cards a little bit more sticky is just gonna be very, very useful. Whether that's Scoria Carrier or Laji or Mole, and getting a double swing with Mole to kill two activators could be powerful. And so I think the Shias deck has enough space to run a couple of copies of this, at least one copy. So yeah, worth putting in your main deck. Next up, we have Kabonk Battle Body, which I put as spicy tech. The reason I put it as spicy tech is because it works for the Sindel mind control strategy, which is very niche, but it's spicy in the fact that I think it has a lot of utility for the current format. Um, Stealing a creature at the right time, powering it up, and using it against your opponent could be a difference maker and swing things into your favor. So I'll keep it in that position. Next up is Homing Seeker. Homing Seeker says when someone would attach a card, I believe it attach it to one of your creatures, you can decide whether it's going to be attached to something else. Um, hmm. This is a tough one. I'll say pretty niche. I think that's pretty niche. Um, I get the utility. I mean, I'll actually put it a little bit higher. Like I'll put it above Blaze Elixir, which is kind of weird. Um, but if you feel like KO is gonna be pretty, I mean, even still, I mean that's kind of like a 1-for-1 interaction. Okay, they might use KO, then I can put it on another card. I don't know. But then in a tournament format, if they know you're playing this card, I mean it's easy to play around. So I would love to see your comments on this one, Homing Seeker. I haven't used the card much, if at all. So I don't know if there's some interaction that I'm not thinking about. Next is Shockwave 8, kill all 8-star creatures. Really good side deck card. The reason I put it in side deck too is because it gives you some match coverage, and you want cards that are impactful across different decks when you're building your sideboard so that you're not taking up too much space, right? So in tournament settings, you only get 6 sideboard cards. Um, and so Shockwave 8 is a card that could be useful across different matchups. Um, Anybody playing something 8 stars or above, or if you're particularly afraid of the Polysium matchup, or even if you're kind of afraid of like Xemius, it could be some usefulness there. Even APC, there's some utility there. Any deck that has a scary 8-star creature, this is a good card to tech against. All right. Next up is Indigo Scleech. Indigo Scleech. I'm actually gonna put Indigo Scleech in side deck worthy. Could be a hot take. I think if your strategy is afraid of mind control type stuff, this could be a card that gives you just a little bit more insulation and a little bit more protection. And that could be a difference maker, right? Like that could give you a win in a key round, just being prepared for that one rogue deck that jumps up and tries to kill you. Especially if you could just package that defense in a card or two and use the rest of your engine to power through. I think it's worth having in the side deck. Comment below. Next, Torch. So Torch says all creatures lose 100 health. This was actually recommended in Zach's video for the Blue Flames, and I see the idea. However, I think that you're better off using something else. Like I think the strategy is already strong enough, and this is going to take up one of your permanent resource zones. And so you're kind of hurting yourself, right? And so like cards that I said I'm putting in the cutout section are like, if you run them, you might make your deck less consistent or somewhat hurting yourself. And I just don't like the idea of making my own creatures weak. So I think there's just better options, but I get the idea. Next up is Divine Doom. Now Divine Doom is pretty interesting because when the Shape Knights first came out, this card instantly was like, oh, I have to put this in the Ascendian deck, right? But when I looked at the Shape Knight creatures and how you want to play the deck, I don't think you really want to discard anything except for Lionel from your hand. Every other thing you kind of want to be in your hand useful when the time is right. And so I've been in situations and I've tested this card out where I draw the card, but I'm like, dang it, I don't really want to discard anything in my hand just to clear their board. And if you're playing Shape Knights correctly, usually you get Lionel set up very efficiently anyway. So it's not in your hand. Like usually you have the triangle guy to search it and get it set up instantly. Um, and so for this, I'll say just cut it out. Actually, I mean, if you're running a Ascendian deck and you want to play this card, I think you might just hurt your own consistency by doing this. And you might get more utility out of things like Galaxy Crash or Time Flash Portal. Okay, next, moving on to Leviathan's Crown. For the Pally people, main deck worthy, not even a discussion. Like it's only at 1, but you really wish it's at 2 in this current format. Because there's going to be so much unique type of removal, whether it's resources or creatures or activators. And so having this to protect your big creatures and keep them on the board longer is going to be very vital. So yeah, any Pally people, you should run this card. Next is Deep Space Lighthouse. Deep Space Lighthouse. I'm putting in. It's either top of spicy tech or bottom of side deck worthy. We're moving towards a format where I think the top decks are like going to be pretty obvious. And I could be jumping the gun, but after testing, like I'm seeing a lot of things that are like really, really powerful with the decks that I listed on my tier list. Go check that video out, the deck tier list. And so if you think about a tournament setting and you think about the power level of a certain deck. If a lot of people are going to run it, Lighthouse is just going to be useful regardless. And I almost want to put it in main deck worthy because if you're running into like a lot of mirror matches, then Lighthouse is going to be really, really powerful. And so, and there's a lot of flexibility with this as far as like mind control strategies too. So I'll put it somewhere at the top of side deck worthy. Next is Powerproof Suit. Powerproof Suit is pretty interesting to me. It says attach it to a creature, and and that creature's abilities are canceled. Um, I would like this card if the abilities that I were concerned with involve creatures that would be killed. I think about like a lightning squaws or um, pretty much any of the squaws or anything like that, where like if you kill it, then its ability happens. Then this card is like somewhat useful, but I don't see it being useful in the current format. So I'll put it in cut it out. Next, Omniplanetary Ticket. I hope I'm not butchering the text, but I believe it says at the start of your turn, instead of drawing a card, you can search your galaxy and add a creature to your hand. I'm not sure if there's any other restrictions from that. Oh, you can add a creature to your hand that's not from your planet. Um, hmm. Could be a hot take, but I'll put this in spicy tech. And the reason I'm putting it here is because I've seen the Blue Flame engine be splashed into different decks with different planets. For example, like I've seen a Skelly Blue Flame deck. And so if your planet is Cindian, I'm sorry, if your planet is Sindel and you play this activator card, then you're instantly getting like Laji or Chakra to your hand. And now that combo's live. So I don't know. I wouldn't sleep on this card. And if you're cooking up a deck that's running different planets, but you kind of want like a quick search for something else, it might be worth considering. So uh, please let me know how you feel about this card in the comments. Next is Rilla Hex Mine. Rilla Hex Mine. Where do I want to put this? Um, I think bottom of main deck worthy. It's always going to be a good card. Being able to deck thin, like deck thinning is deck winning. And so the faster you're able to cycle through your cards, um, the more advantage that you can build up. And so if your deck has 2 free slots, please run this card. But if you're already kind of stressed for putting certain cards in to keep your strategy alive, then don't feel bad about not running this card, is what I would say. Okay. Next, we got Space Pit. Space Pit was a lot stronger in a different format when it would hit things like Skelegas or Solomancer from Solo Aggro. But the restriction of hitting something 3 stars or lower is not gonna be so useful in this format. Because against Shape Knights, the only thing you will really be hitting is Triangle and Lionel. But I mean, if they have another triangle, then Lionel gets set up again. And then if you're bouncing the triangle, um, I mean, that was a card that was pretty much going to die quickly anyway. And so you're wasting a deck slot against something that's not as powerful. Also, against Skelly Gas, it's not as popular right now. And I think there's just strong ways to play against that setup right now. And then against Solo Mancer, yes, it's a 450 health. I mean, 450 power, but it's only 180 health. And like I said in my deck tour video, if decks are putting up 2 creature boards, Solomancer gets significantly weaker, or it becomes even more awkward where it's only clearing boards if it has Blaze Elixir with it. Um, in that deck in general, Solo Aggro has some trouble setting up 2 creature boards from my experience. So I would say cut it out. You can run better options. All right, next up is a interesting card, Super Splot. Now, Super Splot for anyone playing a Polysium strategy, I'm actually gonna put it in spicy tech because whenever you play anything with 3 stars or lower and you pop this with it, that's instantly gonna get rid of a resource or an attachment. Um, so similar to what I said about Crow Art Comet, if you catch somebody with their permanent resource out and not being shuffled back or not being protected or something like that, and you pop it, that's really, really good for you. And not to mention, you're popping attachment cards too, like so Abomination Tomb and Phantom Matter when we get to it. Um, could be other options. Or even a for sale sign or a KO. So it's like I think there's enough utility to justify using this in a Polysium strategy just to make sure that you kind of keep pace with the current format. The next one is Powerproof Scanner. Powerproof Scanner says when a creature's ability would happen if it's played, then you can cancel it. And I really wish this card was a little bit better because it would kind of balance out certain things that are happening in the format. But the problem is that the creature ability, to my understanding, has to be an on play ability. So like Pelfam, like when Pelfam is played, then you have to bounce something. So then this would work. But things like the Shape Knights are once per turn, which means that they can wait until they've played a couple creatures or get things set up, and then they use the abilities after the fact. And because that's the case, I would say just cut this out. Like I don't think it's worth running, but I do wish it was a better card. Next is Point Turret. Point Turret, I think, is definitely main deck worthy. I'll put it right behind Beast of the Black Hole. Um, Cards are hitting for a lot of damage right now. A lot of the swings that I'm seeing in practice games are like 4 points and above consistently, 4 to 6 to 8 in one turn. And so having Point Turret just gives you a little bit more defensive utility, um, to not only gain points but protect your planet at the same time. So, not too much to say about that. Next is Nightmare Matter. Now, I think Nightmare Matter is actually um, spicy tech, and I'll put it above Eternity Amulet. I haven't tested this card much, but in theory, it could be pretty useful to counter some things, right? Because, like, if a card with 5 stars or lower is destroyed, I think it's only by attack though, which makes it weird. But you can punish someone for attacking into you. And so think about, a Shias deck when your stuff already has low health. This helps you clear them, and then you can follow up with a strong counter attack. And so there might be something to this, and there's obviously more utility because across different decks because it only has to be a 5 star or lower. So maybe there's more to be explored with Nightmare Matter. Next is Ultimate Doom. Now I know what you're thinking. You saw Zach Shape Night video, and you're like, okay, Cloud Cells plus Artorias is like 11 stars, and then if they play any other creature, that's 13 stars, and then I can just nuke the whole board. No, just no, just cut it out. It's very too situational. Um, and by the time you're even ready to use this card, it's like, yeah, just don't. Um, and not to mention, like I said, if Black Hole Blocker is powerful enough, then that's already a counter to this. And so you're waiting for something to be useful at a time where you're already at a disadvantage and it still might be countered. So just don't run it. Don't run it. All right. Next, Kabonk Silence Body. Spicy tech. Spicy tech. And I think I'm leaking some goo here. Spicy tech. Um, it makes whatever creature you attach it to Syndian. The bonus effect is it's also immune to attachment cards and immune to the abilities of cards that it's going against. I'm sorry, the immune of the abilities of creatures from the same planet. So think about a mirror matchup. Um, yeah, I don't need to say too much more about that. Like I think this card is like saucy, spicy tech for sure. Next up is Meteor Blaster. I think this is like if they're gonna destroy one of your resource or attachments, then you counter it. And so this is like a counter to Crow Comet, which I get, I understand, but I think it's still too niche, a little too situational to be really used. So I would say stay away from it. Um, yeah, yeah. I don't know. I don't think the strategies are running permanent resources and attachments, but you don't want to build your deck where it's so reliable on one permanent resource, where that if it's destroyed, your whole strategy falls apart. I think that's just bad deck building. So I would say um, I get what it does, but it might be a little too situational. Next up is KO. KO, I'm actually gonna put fairly high. I'll put it like right behind Black Hole Blocker. The format now is running stuff that is under 400 health. I'm sorry, under 400 power, but has really good utility and good abilities. With that being said, you really don't want to get in a situation where you're like walled off just because a person has a high health creature. And so you have a really good strategy going, but if you're not respecting Scardians, for example, that's 440 health. That's like stopping you from doing anything. So you want to consider keeping this in the main deck. Even at one copy, I think is helpful. Um, but the way the decks are being built now, two copies might be the way to go. Next up is terramorphing. Now, terramorphing is pretty interesting because I would put it somewhere between niche and spicy tech. The idea is basically that you want to swap planets to help play around people running moons. Um, like the Shias moons are really really powerful right now. Even the Syndian moon needs to be respected a little bit. Um, the thing is that I think their engines are still strong even without the planet abilities. Um, like Syndian, for example, can still play without their planet. Um, this would be good against like Roka, for example, who's very dependent on Roka being the planet to get abilities to pop. But even then, like I wouldn't necessarily put that in side deck. And I'm not seeing enough utility to make it spicy tech. And so you're kind of sacrificing what your own engine is supposed to do just to slow down your opponent. And even then, I think they're still playing through a lot of stuff. So I'll put it um, in niche. You know, it might help you in one particular matchup, but I don't know if you want to put a side deck slot dedicated for terramorphing. Okay, Monument to Creation. Now, Monument to Creation, I actually like in the side deck, particularly for the Shias matchup. So, like I said, if they get the moon set up, they're drawing very consistently. And so, running this in that matchup, even if it's the mirror or if you just like, hey, I need to be able to keep pace with the Shia stuff. Their planet and their moon gives them the draw ability, and so this card is going to be live very, very often. So I would say it's really good to have in the side deck to respect that matchup because it's a really strong deck right now. Next up is Phantom Matter. Phantom Matter is one of those cards that you want to have it in your main deck. Like just run it. Like you think you don't need it, but you probably do. So find space. It's only one. It's at one because it's limited, but the the utility that this card can give you, especially in a mirror matchup or stealing a key card out of the grave. Like I said, the current format is utilizing the grave very strategically. Um, and it's so much match coverage with this card to get an advantage, and it's a free play, so like just run it. Um, Next is Burning Damocloid. Now, Burning Damocloid is very interesting to me because there are enough resources and stuff going around where it's really good to run it. I really wish that this card canceled out permanent resources too, but the text says single use resources only. So, with that being said, you're giving up 4 stars. But it might protect you in a very key situation. I'll put it in niche slash situational, and kind of for the same reasons I said for sale sign. You just have to be careful about how well your deck can run this card, because if you're already stressed for stars, using 4 stars to potentially slow your opponent down, they might have follow up cards. Um, you're putting yourself in a weird position. All right. Last but not least is Seal of Eternity. Now, in theory, Seal of Eternity is going to be really good. And I just realized I forgot a very key card here. Seal of Eternity is very good, but it's only going to stop one interaction. And so, just like Erratic Void, it could be clutch, but only probably in one moment. And so you don't want to do that. The card that I'm missing here for side deck, and I can't believe I forgot to add it to the text, is Galdora's Box. So our bonus card, our 55th card, is Galdora's Box, which should definitely be in your side deck. I would probably put it at the top of side deck worthy. Um, because like I've been saying throughout the video, the format really using things that are being put into the grave. And so if you kind of lock them out of using those cards, you have a big opportunity to hurt a lot of people's engines and strategies. So yeah, Galdora's box is that last card, and it would be towards the top. My apologies for not adding that in uh, to the video, but yeah. Honestly, I think everything looks pretty good. I think I did a good job of kind of organizing main deck worthy with my justifications. I think the side deck cards are good. These are like wide utility. Um, and you only get a few slots anyway, but these like are very good options. Spicy tech, these are things that really need to be discussed a little bit more because um, who knows what these strategies can open up, especially if you're trying to like counter the meta or keep on par with the meta. Niche, situational, like they're not bad cards to have, and the majority of these are actually really good cards, but um, you got to think about deck space. And so you want to be very careful about which ones you pick from this list. And then last but not least, like I said, cut it out. No order is really necessary. I just don't think they're good cards. And maybe you do. So yeah, let me know below. Hit me with a like, hit me with a comment, and look forward to seeing you guys on the next video. This is Chrono Knight from Chaos Galaxy checking out.